This is The Minimum Commitment, film theory in small doses, where the most frightening issues we carry is not in our DNA, but in the unspoken secrets our families choose not to acknowledge. I'm Don Lawler, film scholar, curator of tone, and someone who understands that silence in a house like this isn't tranquility. It's tension. Let's get into it. Ari Aster's Hereditary begins with grieving. A static image of an obituary tells us that someone has died. But it's not the quiet, dignified kind of grieving. It's the kind that festers. The kind that seeps into wood and breath and blood. The death of a grandmother should be an ending. In this film, it's an infection, one that spreads through the Graham family like a curse written in their DNA. Evil in Hereditary festers in memory, in bloodlines, in the quiet resentment passed from parent to child. Every secret becomes an heirloom. Every silence is a form of inheritance. The horror is remembered rather than conjured. Aster directs with the precision of an autopsy, exposing not what's hidden, but what's inherited. This is a story about how grief can transform and evolve, gradually shaping a person's emotional landscape. It considers how guilt can take on almost ritualistic qualities, becoming a repeated, almost sacred act that the individual performs as a way to cope or understand their suffering. Additionally, it explores the complex experience of surviving one's past, highlighting how the process of moving forward can sometimes feel like an extension of the pain, as if prolonging the curse rather than escaping it. Every look, every silence, every scream feels like a symptom passed down from one generation to the next. Where other horror films ask, "What if evil comes for us?" this one whispers something far worse. What if it's always been here? The first moments of Hereditary establish precision. Aster begins with control, miniatures, order, the illusion of stability. We move through a world that feels designed rather than inhabited. The Graham house functions less as a home than as a display case, a controlled environment built to observe what happens when structure fails to contain emotion. The opening shot makes that clear. A model bedroom becomes real, and the story begins inside a space that was never private. Every object, every angle feels intentional, as if someone or something has already arranged the outcome. The effect isn't sentimental or sensational. It's standard protocol. We're carefully observing the gradual behind-the-scenes development of grief as it forms and unfolds before any acknowledgement occurs. Aster treats the camera like an instrument of containment. Every movement is measured, every composition is very deliberate. The symmetry of the Graham house mirrors the illusion that order can protect us. But inside that symmetry, the cracks begin to show. Aster's frames often divide characters with doorways, glass, or furniture. Subtle boundaries that turn intimacy into separation. He shoots like a patient observer, his camera fixed at human height, rarely intruding, as if the family's suffering is unfolding in a diorama built for us to study. There's a quiet echo of director Yasujiro Ozu in that restraint. The way his film Tokyo Story arranges people in rectangles, using stillness to reveal everything that can't be said aloud. But where Ozu's compositions evoke grace and regret, Aster's evoke paralysis. The Graham household is staged with the same precision, but the air inside it feels wrong, too still, too composed, like a memory refusing to decay. It's the visual language of detachment. At the center of Hereditary is Annie Graham, played by Toni Collette, in a performance that feels both volcanic and meticulously restrained. She's a miniature artist by trade, someone who reconstructs the world in perfect scale, even as her real life unravels around her. Her work is precise, almost clinical, but it reveals more than it conceals. Through Annie, Aster gives form to the impossible task of processing grief, to examine pain from a distance, to frame it and understand it before it consumes her entirely. Annie's miniatures aren't symbolic in any simple way. They are procedural, experiments in reconstruction. Each diorama becomes a controlled echo of a moment she can't face directly. She rebuilds bedrooms, hallways, and dinner tables with obsessive precision, trying to make sense of a reality that keeps collapsing around her. It's her method of control, and the film's. A shared need to find structure in chaos. The terror in Hereditary doesn't emerge from the supernatural. It comes from what's passed down, both seen and unseen. Aster builds a world where trauma behaves like architecture. Each generation constructs the framework that traps the next. Annie's mother, the dead woman at the beginning of the film, leaves behind more than grief. She leaves a system, rituals, expectations, a map of control. The family's tragedy feels inevitable, rooted less in the supernatural and more in the emotional patterns they can't escape. Silence, denial, and guilt, mistaken for obligation. That's what makes the film's horror feel uniquely empirical and almost inevitable in nature. It suggests that grief isn't just an emotional response, but becomes hereditary, passing down through generations like a genetic trait. The behavior of the characters replicates itself in a manner similar to DNA sequences, emphasizing a biological inevitability. The past, rather than simply haunting the present, actively engineers and shapes it, molding the current reality through unresolved traumas and inherited memories. By the time the film edges toward the occult, the possession feels less like invasion and more like fulfillment, a design completing itself. Every frame, every sound, every movement leads back to the same truth. What we inherit defines what destroys us. The turning point in Hereditary arrives through accident. Daughter Charlie, played by Millie Shapiro, leans out the window of a moving car, gasping for air, her throat closing from a severe allergic reaction. Her brother Peter, portrayed with raw, unguarded panic by Alex Wolff, drives faster, desperate to save her. Then, in a single, horrifying instant, delivers an act so abrupt it fractures the film's structure. Aster stages this sequence with restraint that borders on cruelty. There's no score, no build-up, no warning, just headlights and the hum of the road. And something in the lane that forces Peter to swerve. The car veers toward the shoulder, and in that instant, the world narrows to a single telephone pole. earlier that day we passed it in sunlight, its surface marked with a faint, almost imperceptible sigil. Now, under cover of night, it becomes destiny. The impact is sudden. Then silence. So complete, it feels like the film itself has stopped breathing. When the camera holds on Peter, frozen in shock, Aster abandons the usual language of reaction. No cutting, no music, no motion, just stillness and the low hum of the car. But in the background, a stark red light splashes across the back seat, the reflection of brake lights staining the frame like fresh gilt. We can't see what's there, but we feel it. The color keeps drawing our eyes toward the darkness we're so desperate to avoid. That red glow becomes a visual trap, a symbol of conscience and consequence sharing the same space. The shot doesn't frighten us through what it shows, but through what our minds create to fill the void. It's horror as implication, and one of the purest examples of how Aster turns stillness into suffering. For a long moment, nothing moves. Peter's breath shudders in the dark, caught between confession and paralysis. Time stretches, becomes viscous. We're no longer watching action. We are trapped inside consequence. Peter glances at the rearview mirror and quickly looks away. That single decision, not to look, creates the film's most horrifying image. What we don't see becomes what we can't forget. When morning comes, and Annie's scream breaks the silence, the film's order collapses completely. From this point forward, Hereditary unfolds under a transformed grammar, where traditional causality dissolves into chaos. Scenes no longer stand separate. They bleed into one another, blurring the boundaries of time and space. The camera movements take on a haunting, almost supernatural quality, slow, creeping, omniscient, evoking a sense of possession. In this new language of cinema, form becomes an extension of fate itself, enfolding the viewer in an inescapable destiny. What follows immediately after the accident is not genuine recovery or healing. What takes its place is a process of careful reorganization of life. Every gesture made by the people involved, every moment of silence they share, seems to be directed by something ancient and beyond conscious control, like an unseen force guiding their actions. However, this force isn't similar to a spirit simply moving furniture around. It's a powerful structure that influences the movements and decisions of people during this time of adjustment. Ari Aster builds this descent like a ritual in plain sight. Rooms are framed as dioramas. People are placed like figurines. Grief is staged, not expressed. Annie doesn't mourn. She performs mourning. Her voice cracks the air, but her body stays rigid, as if bound by some unseen expectation. Not a supernatural force, but the unbearable pressure to keep composure in a family that has already been shattered. In Aster's world, ritual and routine become interchangeable. Family dinners play like ceremonies. Conversations echo with incantation. Ordinary life turns liturgical, and that's the horror. The characters think they're acting freely, but every word, every glance is another movement in a pre-written rite. By the time Annie discovers the truth, that her family has been prepared for this moment for generations, the ritual is complete. It's not a possession story anymore. It's an inheritance ritual disguised as one. Aster never gives us catharsis. In the final moments, Peter, broken and hollow, climbs into a treehouse. Candles flicker, figures bow. Annie's headless body kneels before him like an offering. And as Peter looks up, something passes through him. Acceptance, surrender, or possession. The camera rises slowly with him in revelation. The ritual is complete. The cycle holds. Hereditary ends where it began, inside a model of the family that never had a choice. Hereditary is often described as a haunting film about grief and loss, capturing the raw, overwhelming feelings of sorrow. However, grief is only the surface symptom, a visible sign of deeper emotional turmoil. Beneath this outward display lies a far more unnerving question. What if our pain isn't ours alone? Aster suggests that inheritance isn't just genetic or material. It's spiritual, psychological, and architectural. The home becomes a body that remembers. Each generation rebuilds the same barriers, repeats the same patterns, and mistakes the repetition for comfort. This is why the film feels so suffocating. It isn't haunted by ghosts, it's haunted by obligation. Every scream and every silence is another echo of what was predetermined long before birth. The family isn't cursed because they did something wrong. They're cursed because they were born into a story that won't end. And maybe that's what makes Hereditary so deeply unsettling. It exposes the illusion of control. We want to believe that our choices define us, but some legacies move through us like gravity, invisible, constant, and impossible to resist. Grief becomes the ritual. Family becomes the altar. And devotion, once meant to protect, becomes the hand that delivers us to the very thing we fear. That's your thought for the day. Minimum commitment, maximum meaning. See you next time. The Minimum Commitment is produced, recorded, and edited by Don Lawler. Music by Don Lawler.